Welcome everyone. Bienvenidos todas y todos to this second session of the webinar. My name is Eduardo Castillo Vinuesa. I'm head curator here at Media Lab, and I will be hosting the session today. If you're joining us today for the first time, for you to know, the objective of these sessions is to present the 8 selected projects that we will be developing here at Media Lab during our upcoming collaborative prototyping laboratory, in the context of our first lab called Medios Sintientes. For those that don't know about this, the Collaborative Prototyping Lab is a 2-week intensive workshop that we will be carrying out here in Media Lab between the 21st of April and the 4th of May, in collaboration with 3 mentors, Abelardo Gil Fournier, Nerea Calvillo, and the artistic duo Quadrature. They will be the ones that supervise and tutorship the development of these 8 amazing projects that we have selected through a public and international open call for promoters during the last few months. But we are not done yet. As its own name shows, the Collaborative Prototyping Lab is a collaborative endeavor, which is why we just launched some weeks ago our second open call looking up for collaborators. People that want to join us here in Madrid to help us out to develop these projects. For those interested in the call, I think it's important to say that the Media Lab offers collaboration fellowships to cover the travel plus accommodation expenses of 8 collaborators with independence of his or her place of origin. So if it doesn't matter if you apply from South America, Asia, Africa, Europe, or even inside of Spain, we will cover all the expenses to bring the selected people during 2 weeks here to Madrid to participate in the workshop. This open call is currently ongoing, and it will be open until the 3rd of April. If you need more information about this, make sure to check out our website, both our website Medios Sintientes, but also the website of Media Lab Matadero for information. Maybe we can type the address here in the chat of YouTube. Yeah, and you will find more information about the open call there. So today, we will cover the remaining 4 projects, following up the amazing 4 that were introduced in yesterday's sessions. It's important to say that we will be answering questions. This is a live event, so both questions, even if they are specifics for the project, but also if you guys have any question regarding the process of the open call, or any question for the guest speaker that I want to have today, make sure to type the questions in the chat in YouTube, and we will address them during the presentations today. Similar to yesterday, we have invited 2 amazing guest speakers for today's session too, which practice, we think, engage directly with some of the topics that we are dealing with during the Medios Sintientes lab. Also, we will be presenting today our second artist in residence, who will be doing a research project here in Media Lab during the next few weeks, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so let's get into it. Our first guest is Carlos Bayot. Carlos is an architect and head of 3D laser scanning at Factom Arte, an adjunct professor at Columbia University. His work explored the technological and cultural processes that define the original qualities of objects, developing a contemporary approach to the conservation of artistic heritage through high-resolution documentation and facsimile making, which are, for those that doesn't know, exact rematerialization of a work of art. He works on numerous projects, including the first high-resolution digitalization of the Tomb of Seti, the first in Luxor, Egypt, as well as artistic documentation in major museums. He organizes exhibitions such as the installation of the facsimiles of the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings and of the Sala Bologna in the Palazzo Pepoli. A speaker and organizer of various seminars, as well as guest lecturer at various institutions. So, thank you so much, Carlos, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eduardo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Thank you to all the team in Media Lab Matadero, and congratulations so far for the work you are doing. I would like to share my screen now. Let me know if it works. Can you see it? So
yes, we see it, yeah.
I will be talking about the work that Factom Foundation is doing, especially in Venice. As Eduardo mentioned, we are developing works actually on a global scale. We've been working a lot in Egypt. We work with different museums, with different cultural institutions. But I want to focus today on the way we are using digital technologies for understanding how Venice works today. I want to first introduce a little bit about who we are. So we are based in Madrid, and Factum and Factom Foundation are kind of sister organizations, because Factum is dedicated to producing works of art for contemporary artists. We give them technical solutions to what they want to do to materialize their ideas. So here are some pictures of our studios in Madrid. And we are working, for example, with artists like Anish Kapoor, Mark Quinn, Marina Abramovic, Carlos Gareco, Manuel Franquelo, etc. And we are collaborating with them into making the best out of the available technologies and new technologies for producing their ideas. At the same time, the Factom Foundation is dedicated to using these digital technologies for helping the preservation of cultural heritage and art in general. And in order to do that, we have been specialized in creating or developing our own systems, our own 3D scanners, our own color capture technologies, reproduction technologies, because what we are trying to achieve is, let's say that what it's possible to be done today and in the near future in order to preserve the cultural heritage, not just for today, but also for the future. One of the things that we are famous for is by making facsimiles, making exact replicas of works of art. So in this image in the studio, one of the printing tests that we have at the back of this wall is a section of a painting by Veronese. I want to talk to you very quickly about this as an example of why and how we are doing facsimiles to help the protection and preservation of cultural heritage. In order to do that, I want to start by this image. This is something that until very recently, it was a common image in, let's say, the main museums in the world. This is an image in Paris, in the Louvre Museum. And all these people are gathering in order to look at the Mona Lisa. They are all trying to get a picture or a selfie in front of the Gioconda. And what is happening here is that in a way they are giving their backs, they are ignoring a much bigger painting, a much bigger canvas that is behind them, which is The Wedding at Cana by Paolo Veronese. This painting that is sharing the same room as the Gioconda, it was not originally made to be shown in Paris. As you can imagine, this painting, it was first made to be on display in Venice, in the island of San Giorgio. What happened is that in this space, the refectory that was designed by Palladio, as well as the main church in San Giorgio Maggiore, all these spaces, all these monumental spaces were meant to be part of a global understanding of art and architecture that should be working all together according to the same principle, to the same concept. So this huge painting representing the Wedding at Cana, it used to be at the end of this refectory. This is where all the monks gathered to eat together. So the representation of the first miracle of Christ, the Wedding at Cana, it was in a way presiding this moment of that they were sharing together. What happened is that Napoleon took the painting. It actually had to rip it in different sections and took it to Paris. And since then, it's been on display in the Louvre Museum. We were asked about the possibility of making an exact replica of this painting, so it could be, in a way, brought back to Venice, to its original context. We are not talking about any kind of virtual representation or playing with projections on the wall. We were talking back then in 2007, 2008, we were talking about a physical reproduction, something you could actually touch. So the first thing in order to do that is how you document with digital technologies with the best possible photographic techniques at the highest possible resolution. How can you capture the qualities of that surface, the surface of the original painting, without any contact? We are talking about 100% safe technologies for the original. So you could actually capture in the highest possible resolution the color and the material qualities of this huge canvas. We had to adapt existing technology. So for example, we took one of those A4 flatbed scanners that we have in offices or in any desk, and we had to mount it on top of a telescopic mast so we could record the full area at a certain distance of a few centimeters from the surface, and then composing like a mosaic, like a collage of small sections of the painting in very high resolution that then we could reunite together and combine together into one single file in very high resolution. This information, once we captured all the data that we need, and we are back in our studios in Madrid, we have to be able to rematerialize it physically, in this case by using digital printers, so we could print them on a canvas very similar to the original. So we are not talking about painting anything by hand, only the joints and minimal retouches that are necessary in order to complete the huge size of a painting like this. So it's a reproduction, it's a replica. It is made by a combination of digital technologies and craft traditional skills. And this is how it looks today if you visit the island of San Giorgio in Venice. You can see the refectory, you can see the space, and you can see that now it is complete with the painting that the artist, Paolo Veronese, designed to be on display in this specific setting. As you can see, some lines of the architecture that are represented in the painting are a continuation of the actual architectural motifs in the space itself. And what is more important is that you can see the painting at the right space, but also with the correct height, without that completely artificial golden frame as it's on display in Paris. You can see it with the natural light from the windows, exactly how the artist envisioned this work of art. So at the end, all these characteristics combined together, they make something very special. They make something that when you are in front of this, even though you know it's not the original, even though you are completely aware that you are in front of a replica made in the 21st century, even if it's not the original, maybe your experience is more authentic. So it is this idea of originality and authenticity that we are trying to challenge in every project that we are doing. Reproducing the surface of paintings is something that has been almost like an obsession for us. In the case of the painting in Venice, it was mostly about how to reproduce color. But then when we wanted to reproduce also the surface of a painting, like for example, the brush strokes or the texture of a canvas or a panel painting, it becomes much harder or a completely different type of challenge. It is because of that that we designed our own 3D scanner specific for the surface of paintings and other low relief objects. The Lucida 3D scanner that is made in collaboration with the artist and engineer Manuel Franquelo is the result of this research. And thanks to a system like this, it is possible, for example, to record the surface of a panel painting by Rubens, like this one in the Museo del Prado in Madrid, and obtain this type of information. It is possible to, in a way, ignore the color of the painting and look directly at the topographical qualities of a painting. So we are starting to understand that it is not a flat image, that any painting in the world, it's actually a three-dimensional object, almost like a sculpture. And especially because we are talking about a 3D scanner in high resolution, it is possible to capture any differences in depth to a level of 1/10 of a millimeter. This is why we consider this scanner a high-resolution scanner specifically developed for conservation of works of art. Over the years, we have been applying this scanner to studying all kinds of paintings, from Renaissance artists to avant-garde to abstract painting, old masters, etc. And we have been learning to look at paintings without the color. So we are being very interested on seeing what is the type of information that you can obtain by looking at a painting under this light, looking as if it was really an aerial view of a landscape, almost like that. No? We also find out that this tool, it is a very interesting scanner as education to learn, especially for those students that are interested in learning new technologies for cultural preservation. This type of system is very intuitive to use, and we have been applying it as part of different training initiatives, like, for example, with Columbia University, also actually with the Technical School of Architecture in Madrid, where Eduardo is teaching, and also the School of Architecture in Venice. And it was a good way of introducing students who will be the cultural managers, the cultural heritage managers of the future, how to understand why it is essential to document monuments and works of art in high resolution. Together with this 3D scanner, we have been, of course, using high resolution photogrammetry to document not only paintings, but also the surface and the texture of sculptures and also architectural elements. So at the end, we started to carry out a series of projects in Venice. All these images that I am showing you now, they have been happening in Venice, and especially in the island of San Giorgio, in collaboration with the Fondazione Giorgio Cini, who are the managers of the island. They have been creating a very interesting program of cultural activities and initiatives on the island, and especially they own a very important collection of not only works of art, but also books, manuscripts, furniture, and so on. So thanks to these initiatives, it has been possible to gather a proper archive, a proper digital archive of all the surface qualities, all those characteristics that are defining these works of art, so that we could have this documentation for the future. But the approach is always the same. It doesn't matter if we are recording a small painting or a ceiling or part of a facade in an architectural scale. Also working in Venice, we had the opportunity of taking the students from New York to record this famous trophy wall. This is part of the exterior facade of the Basilica of St. Mark's in Venice. And it is important because it's like a patchwork of marbles and stones from different parts of the world. And thanks to this combination of different techniques, including the 3D scanning technologies, but also photogrammetry, it was possible to gather this type of information, documents of the different panels of the marble types, with and without the color. So we could create this type of, it's like a small archive of a small portion of the city of Venice, but it is very relevant because it will allow in the future to kind of follow how this part of the city has been changing over time. It is possible to monitor different deteriorations or modifications to a level of sub-millimeter resolution. We are not talking just about capturing the general shape of a building here, but we are talking about the specific texture of one specific marble stone. So after developing different recording technologies, and thanks to the collaboration with the Giorgio Cini Foundation, we decided it was necessary to go one step beyond. And then we made a partnership also with the Digital Humanities Lab at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in order to combine our own fields of expertise. So if Factom, we have been specialized in developing different recording technologies. The Digital Humanities Lab in Lausanne, they have been specialized in extracting new knowledge out of digital information, thanks to artificial intelligence or other types of pattern recognition software. This is the partnership of these three organizations made way to archive which is the new space in Venice dedicated to the analysis and recording of cultural heritage in Venice. So we started to look at how to record as much as possible of the cultural heritage in the island or in the city of Venice. We developed not only 3D scanners, but also a specific system for capturing huge amounts of archival documents, like double-sided documents, for example, with the replica scanner. We were also collaborating with the Chini for recording manuscripts and other types of important books. And for example, because in Venice we have the State's Archive with a huge amount of archival records that have not really been studied 100%. It was possible, in collaboration with the Lausanne Polytechnique, to develop this type of new software for recognizing common elements, not only in texts, but also in images. So by scanning different archives from different collections, not only in the Chini Foundation, but also in other important archives in Venice, it was possible to not only to have a compilation of this information, but also to start establishing relations between images that art historians maybe they didn't consider initially. So thanks to this artificial intelligence software, it was possible to establish new relations, establish links between images, texts, and also maps. Studying the evolution of maps in Venice, it has been one of the important fields of research in archive, in this new venture that we have in collaboration with Lausanne. And it is one of the best ways of understanding how Venice has been evolving over time. One very quick example is what we were doing with this heart-shaped Mappamundi that is located in the Biblioteca Marciana in the center, in the St. Mark's Square in Venice. These 6 planks of wood, they were preserved. We had the opportunity of scanning them with the Lucida 3D scanner. And then each of the planks, each of the 3D models, they were used as an exercise of digital restoration. We were doing exactly the same as a restorer would be doing with the originals, but on a digital environment without ever touching the original. You can see some examples here of the 3D information before and after this process of restoration. So then we could try ways of rematerializing this data. There is always this two-way trip between capturing information and then how you make this information physical again. So through different techniques of 3D printing and CNC milling, it was possible to recreate this, each of these 6 planks again in a new material in order to create for the first time in, let's say, hundreds of years, a new series of prints of this unique map. This example of digital restoration of a map that is located in Venice, that is part of the history of Venice, is one of the things that are possible to be done thanks to digital technologies. It is also possible to record a painting like this one by Vittore Carpaccio that it's called Two Venetian Ladies. And once we have the information, propose to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles to go and record the other painting that they have, that it has been separated from the one in Venice, but they were originally part of the same panel, which are now in different locations. So thanks to digital techniques and to rematerialization as facsimiles, it should be possible to make a new version of these original works in which the two halves are reunited again. This is a detail showing that even though each panel has its own restoration history and therefore its own aspect, they actually belong one on top of the other. Of course, this technology, as I was mentioning at the beginning, it's important if you want to make a facsimile of something. So for instance, this painting by Titian that is part of also part of the Museo Correra and the different museums in the Piazza di San Marco in Venice. it had to travel for a temporary exhibition. So for this temporary substitution, we created this facsimile that could be put in place for the duration of the exhibition. And then obviously using digital technologies for actual preservation of fragile objects or artworks that are about to deteriorate or about to disappear, actually, it's one of the best reasons for making high-resolution documentation. This is one of the artworks by Banksy that appeared in the wall in Venice in I think in the spring 2019. And we had the opportunity of recording it, not only the color, but also the actual texture of the wall with photogrammetry. As you can see here, my colleague from Factom shooting with his camera from a water taxi, actually. And it was very important, as a kind of preservation exercise, because what happened is that a few months later, in the November 2019, there was this huge aqualta, this flood, this phenomenon that was flooding all the center of Venice with record levels, something that was not seen in many, many years, actually, since there are records of this type of flooding. So this graffiti, this work of art, is not existing anymore as we could see it when we recorded it. So having these sections of Venice that are part of the history of Venice and having them documented and archived for the future is really the mission of our organization. So at the end, all these different approaches to how to use digital technologies and different fabrication techniques, we realized that it was necessary to find a way of applying them in order to record the whole city of Venice. The rising levels of water is obviously one of the issues in Venice. It's one of the things that are part of the problems of the city, something that it's putting in danger its cultural heritage, their monuments, their works of art, and their history in general. So we decided to put in practice, just like a pilot project, documenting in 3D, in high resolution, the entire island of San Giorgio, where the facsimile of Veronese was located 15 years ago, as a pilot project to see how could be done a recording of the full island, of the full city of Venice. We started working with a combination of different systems, as we usually do. So combining photogrammetry with 3D laser scanners like a LiDAR scanner that, as you know, it's mainly used for facades or architectural applications. But at the end, it's about how you combine the close-range recording technologies for the details of the texture and the long-range 3D scanners for the actual shape and precise dimensions of buildings. We were working for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer of 2020, taking advantage of the fact that the island was actually empty because of COVID. So we could be recording not only the exterior spaces, but also the interiors of the complex of San Giorgio. And in a work like this, the important thing is to be able to establish a hierarchy. It's not just about going and record everything in the highest resolution. You have to establish what are the important elements that can be recorded just, let's say, in millimeter resolution, and then how can you combine that with recording specific sculptures or specific elements of the decoration that should be recorded in higher detail, in higher resolution. So we started with the Church of San Giorgio Maggiore by Palladio. We continued with probably the next important space, which is the Staircase of Longhena. All these images that you can see are just previews of the 3D models that we are processing and we are generating. But the good thing is that even though it will take some time to process all this information, at least the original data, the raw information, it's already properly archived. So whatever it will happen to the island, at least we know we have a good documentation of how it was in 2020. Then we moved into the interior of the church, documenting the chorus, documenting the altar, also looking at what elements should be recorded in high resolution, or in medium, or in low resolution. And then the interesting thing is what happened when we went down to the crypt under the church. It was possible to record in 3D the actual level of the water. It was important because this is something that is not static. Obviously, it's a dynamic level. It's changing with the tides. It's changing every season, every day, actually. So this idea of the relation between the island with the level of water and how can we record that digitally, in a way, gave us a reason or provided the justification for many of the things that we were doing. We have been looking at the texture of things. And when we were finishing this recording and we were walking in the cloister, in the famous cloister of Palladio, we figured out that the walls, they were changing a lot from time to time. So the plaster walls, every time there was aqua alta, every season that there was flooding, it was making the walls to actually change its shape. This is just a comparison of the 3D information that we capture of the walls in 2 consecutive years. This is the way it looks, this section just this year in 2022. And it's just like the symptom of what's happening with Venice, something that it is very easy to overlook, but it gives us, this reason for why it is important to look at the texture of things. So finally, we decided to look at what are those main points of contact of the island with the surrounded water of the lagoon. And then working with Vivirod, this North American company, we have been installing 3 different sensors that, working through satellite communication, they are capable of registering and anticipating the changes in the water level, racing in the tides, and having this as part of a global network that could provide new information about the movement of the water and about the effects of climate change. This is where we are now. We hope to apply these ideas and this approach to the whole city of Venice. And I just wanted to share with you why we believe it's important to look at cultural heritage preservation from different points of view, different scales, and especially from the texture of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And congratulations for your amazing work, and thank you for sharing that with us. It's amazing. Okay, let's continue with our first project for today, which is a project called Dominatory Interfaces from Wind to Radio, and that was promoted by Juan Duarte and Bettina Carjalan. Like the name of the project shows, Juan and Bettina focus into wind and radio signals as energies that expand on a planetary scale. The project intention is to explore speculative computational representations, devising possible links between airflow and radio transmission, and observing their imperceptible but converging correlations. So Juan, Bettina, thank you so much, and whenever you want.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, hello. Can you hear us well?
Yeah, now we hear you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, great to be here. We start with introducing ourselves a little bit better and then jumping into the subject, what we want to do. My name is Bettina Carjalan. I'm a German stage designer and visual media artist. So my background is theater, opera, performance, and I'm very much interested in a documentary core, like different kinds of storytelling, innovative types of narrative threads. And we show you some pictures from previous work. You see the latest work is a VR experience. It was opening at the CPH Docs and at the Goethe Institute in Beijing.
And my name is Juan Carlos Duarte, Mexican, I'm doing a PhD research in media arts in Aalto University in Finland. And both of us, we are based in between Berlin and Zurich, Mexico City, Tallinn. And right now, at the moment, we are in Madrid, since Bettina is working at the opera in Teatro Real. And tonight we are having a premiere. So we are thrilled to share the night also here as well. And just to share some examples of my work in the media arts part and instrument making, performative, environmental sensing, environmental sound work.
All right. So we want to start with an anecdote. Last week in Madrid, we witnessed an interesting phenomenon. One day, the sky was colored in red, and little by little, we noticed that the city was covered by a thin layer of dust. Later on, we learned from the news that the dust came from the Sahara Desert and reached out to many parts in Spain and other parts in Europe as well, including Denmark and Switzerland. You can see some pictures.
And this phenomenon, known as the Saharan Air Layer or haze, carries particles of sand across the ocean. And depending on certain weather conditions, it crosses the Atlantic Ocean. Besides the reach of the sand particles, the Saharan air layer creates a perceivable effect on the color of the sky. Here is a picture on the left from Berlin and another in the northern part of Mexico during the haze time. The particles of sand dust end up reflecting sunlight as a side effect and cooling down the atmosphere. Dominatory interfaces, our project looks into speculative computing representations, devising potential links between airflow and radio transmissions, and observing their correlations which imperceptibly converge.
So wind, an air movement triggered by different pressure differences. It's an ambivalent force. For thousands of years, wind has been in the mind of the people, and until now, it's really hard to grab. Wind animates mankind to complex philosophical and religious considerations. Wind connects mankind with environment and the universe. It's feared, it's honored, it's quieted and evaluated to the status of God. Let's have a look on this. Okay, there's Odin in the wind of the North Europe. And in Hebrew, they call him Ruach. 5,000 years ago, people prayed to Enlil, the oldest god still known until today. And the Greeks, for example, separated their gods into north, south, west, and eastern points, and into the seasons. Like, for example, Boras, the god of the winter north wind. And in Japan, the god called Funjin. And the word hurricane originally comes from the Mayan god Huracan. So wind also represents spirits. And it says in the Bible, when the wind comes into the house, it also fills up everybody with the Holy Spirit. The breath, our own personal breath, connects the unconscious with the conscious. Whenever I live, it breathes, and it breathes in me automatically. So we are connected in the breath with all other lives at the same time. And until today, we mystify it. We personify the wind and other nature phenomena far beyond its weather properties. And still the wind is our faithful mate. It's a transmitter of message. It's a friend or threatening enemy. And in uncountable poetry, lyrics, and song texts, it reminds us to look out for possible answers in the wind. For example, who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I. But when the trees bow down their heads, the wind is passing by. So, question: how can we plug into this communication channel? And what does it report? Where is the interface between the two dynamics we favor so much, the wind and the radio?
The Aeolian harp was an instrument invented by the German Jesuit Athanasius Kircher. It consisted of a device that played music depending on the wind currents. The Aeolian harp could give accounts of natural entities that communicated with humans in specific landscapes. This message of the Aeolian harp was not the kind of a weather forecast system, but it was an artifact for premonition and divination. More recent technologies for weather prediction include the use of anemometers in combination with thermometers and atmospheric pressure devices and chemical air compounds. The American naturalist Henry David Thoreau described a similar behavior between the ancient Aeolian harp and that from when the early telegraph lines produced when the air-hanging cables were moved by the wind. On this, David Thoreau coined the term telegraphic harp.
In this painting, The Song of the Talking Wires by Henry Varney, we can see a Native American man listening to that kind of sound described by Thoreau. There's a crossing between nature and technology in this shared landscape, where human transformations of nature produce new forms of divination.
Mythologies on the atmospheric phenomena known as natural radio were assimilated to a channeling with non-human mediums, until radio became a vernacular of media and a domesticated technology. When working on the development of wireless telegraphy, Thomas Watson, the assistant of Edison, listened to natural radio, thinking that this was a communication channel with other non-human entities.
So what we want to try, our approach is to create kind of weather stations. We are interested in creating different types and costume-made weather stations, which are placed in different parts of Madrid. And this gives us a basic setup and a prototype for sensing wind and radio data from a specific field. As you can see here in the picture, it's kind of a sketch for that.
And on the other side, we are prototyping this sort of custom-made weather stations with circuits that we are developing ourselves and the electronics that go together. And these go with a system of low radio transmission. So it's sending for a long distance to the space in, for example, in Matadero. And then this compound of data, we are processing them.
So we want to connect this data input finally with an instrument interface, which is part of a past and ongoing research from Juan. And we are looking for a kind of spatial distribution or haptical output, perhaps creating like sound visualizations through vibration, basically exploring energy transduction to turn sensor data into visible, audible, and tactile media with a certain kind of narrative interpretation.
We are very much interested in the focus of technologies beyond a deterministic and utilitarian human-centered purpose, implying diversified perspective that includes indigenous, pre-modern knowledge and a decolonization of technology, underlining non-human agencies and a sense of planetary endowment. Thanks a lot for your attention, and we would like to add that we would like to use this opportunity of the 2-week workshop in Madrid to contact specialists in weather measurement prediction and people who are able to work with these sort of technologies to place these weather stations and processing this data for prediction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juan and Bettina, for your presentation. It was great. Looking forward to see how that project goes during the workshop. Okay, for our next project, we have two collectives, the collective La Colmena and Ambiente Tabanoi. And in the presentation of them, we have today Laura Reyes, Paula Castro, and Julian Santa, that are presenting a project called Food Memories, Connected Countryside City Territories. And how they define it is a digital application where the rural voices of the invisible work are recognized and the food memory of the territory is vindicated through a talking map and implementation of an urban prototype, approaching the deep countryside through agriculture and interactive map-like sensory stations. So, Laura, Paula, Julián, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Vale, gracias. Vamos a compartir acá.
Bueno, muy buen día para todos y todas.
¿Ya se ve la presentación?
Perfecto. Okay.
Bueno, muy buen día para todos y todas. Mucho gusto, mi nombre es Julián Santa, compañera Paula, la compañera Lua. Nuestra propuesta se llama Memorias Alimentarias, conectando los territorios campo y ciudad. Bueno, nosotros somos una juntanza de jóvenes de la ciudad de Bacatá, Colombia, con muchos sueños, utopías y unos sentires haceres alrededor de la memoria alimentaria, la biología, la arquitectura y prácticas organizativas en los territorios. Bueno, ¿qué venimos haciendo y caminando? Venimos caminando alrededor del rescate de la memoria ancestral de los alimentos, las semillas, los espacios de agriculturas, manejo de residuos orgánicos a través de los compostajes y espacios comunitarios para el fortalecimiento de economías locales y de semillas. ¿Qué territorios hemos caminado? Pues consideramos que es necesario caminar el territorio pues, para reconocer esas memorias y esa pluralidad de voces invisibilizadas y silenciadas por las múltiples violencias que hemos sufrido alrededor del derecho al alimento y a la tierra. Y en estas...
¿Quieres ver?
Dale, la siguiente, por favor. Bueno, ¿qué comunidades nos han acompañado en esta juntanza? Nos han encontrado comunidades afrocampesinas del territorio, comunidades indígenas de la comunidad Zenú, comunidad Kogi de la Sierra Nevada Santa Marta, neocampesinos, personas que se deciden ir a reencontrar su origen en el campo, en el Bonda, en Santa Marta. Bueno, ¿y qué venimos hacemos? Porque estas caminatas pues reconocemos esa convicción del amor al territorio, donde las comunidades se organizan en el rescate de las semillas, la soberanía, la seguridad y la autodeterminación alimentaria, prácticas bioculturales en la defensa de espacios de vida, liderados por mujeres, hombres y niños.
Bueno, ¿qué se ha logrado? A partir de este caminar, germinó Caminando la Memoria Alimentaria, las voces detrás del trabajo invisible, donde hemos venido desarrollando un mapa parlante tipo cartel, donde se han visibilizado todas esas experiencias, todos esos sueños, esas luchas, por ser territorios rurales, libres y dignos. Entonces, digamos que acá, a raíz de esos vínculos, se han podido generar jornadas de siembra, talleres, todo en torno como al alimento, al cuidado del medio ambiente. Y ya estando acá en Bogotá, pues ese intercambio generó también como esa posibilidad de hacer la casa de semillas, la casa de semillas Sulajuy acá en Bogotá. Bueno, sobre nuestro proyecto. En primera instancia, lo que queremos empezar a trabajar es una aplicación web o una website, donde toda esa información que se recogió, todas esas voces, todas esas historias, todas esas imágenes, se puedan organizar en esa aplicación y digamos que cualquier persona en el lugar en el que esté pueda tener acceso a la información que estamos compartiendo. Esta aplicación web la organizamos, digamos que durante el viaje hubo unas preguntas que rigieron pues, el viaje, que tenían pues, mucha relación con la memoria alimentaria. Entonces, dentro de esas preguntas y temas, trabajamos pues, qué es la memoria alimentaria, sobre los procesos de recuperación de tierras, sobre las casas de semillas comunitarias, sobre las mujeres rurales, sobre las plantas nativas o alimentos nativos, sobre semillas también y sobre plantas medicinales. Bueno, ya como en la parte, digamos, del prototipo urbano y el mapa interactivo, nosotros pensamos que Bogotá es un sitio donde confluyen muchas culturas muy diversas y digamos que siempre hay un intercambio de todas esas culturas y nos parece muy importante que todos esos procesos se puedan fortalecer y que esos intercambios pues se sigan fortaleciendo. Entonces es por eso que queremos implementar talleres vivos donde se trabaje la memoria y se reflexione en torno al alimento. También por medio de un mapa interactivo urbano conectado a distintas estaciones sensoriales, donde a través de los sentidos podamos viajar y recordar nuestros orígenes, de dónde venimos y esa riqueza también como del alimento dentro del territorio. Es por eso que pensamos en la agricultura urbana como ese escenario educativo y conector del campo y la ciudad, como a través de estos conocimientos y toda esta inspiración podemos generar espacios más conscientes, como a través de las huertas comunitarias y el diseño participativo, pues podemos tener esas herramientas para generar un sentido de apropiación por el espacio público y por el derecho también a la ciudad y al alimento.
Bueno, nosotros también tuvimos la oportunidad de hacer un análisis ya de campo real después del viaje. Entonces analizamos un sector de Bogotá que está ubicado en el sur de la ciudad, alrededor de la cuenca del río Fucha. Entonces elegimos este lugar porque aquí convergen muchos actores socioambientales que pues velan por la recuperación de esta memoria ancestral y como el reconocimiento del río como espacio de vida. Actualmente el uso de este espacio pues es baldío, está un poco abandonado y también no se le da el uso adecuado. Entonces nosotros nos imaginamos cómo este prototipo urbano podría relacionarse con el territorio por medio de elementos como el compostaje urbano, que son las pacas digestoras que compostan residuos a escala urbana, mobiliario público, huertas, la arborización nativa, senderos y una señalización que permita unir estas estaciones sensoriales. Bueno, ya en cuanto a la estación sensorial, que viene siendo como el que va a conectar la aplicación web con el prototipo urbano por medio de estas estaciones, ya en el caso puntual del Caribe, le pusimos Caribe Profundo, la estación del Caribe Profundo, donde también queremos como recrear los espacios que visitamos, que pues las comunidades rurales indígenas y campesinas manejan las casas de pensamiento. Entonces, ¿cómo podemos trasladar esto y pues poderlo mostrar en la ciudad, donde sea un espacio simbólico que busque a través de los sentidos evocar los paisajes, representar la cultura y permitir a los distintos territorios hablar y generar los intercambios del campo y la ciudad? Entonces, por medio de los 5 sentidos más básicos que conocemos, como son la vista, a través de las luces que nos evoquen a estos paisajes, a través del olfato, también, digamos, en cuanto a los alimentos, la agricultura urbana, las semillas, también el sentido del tacto, lo quisimos representar con la variedad de tejidos y de técnicas ancestrales que aún viven en nuestros territorios rurales, en donde muestran toda la ancestralidad y toda la cosmogonía de los pueblos. También en medio del gusto, pues ahí ya también entran los alimentos, las semillas, y la parte del oído, de la escucha, queremos también poder representar estas voces o estos paisajes sonoros en esta estación sensorial. Entonces, básicamente, el perfil de colaboradores que estamos buscando para este laboratorio vivo son como artistas de todo tipo, arquitectos, bioconstructores, diseñadores de instalaciones, también diseñadores gráficos, industriales, textiles, biólogos, ambientalistas, agricultores urbanos. También nos interesa conocer los procesos de casas de semillas para vincularlos con la ciudad de Madrid, como estos procesos de agroecología, permacultura que hay en la ciudad. Y pues ya en cuanto a conocimientos de tipo tecnológico que desarrollen herramientas digitales como tipo aplicación, ingenieros de luz y sonido, vendría siendo como nuestros perfiles de colaboradores. Bueno, nosotros pues a partir de este proceso colaborativo, la pregunta pues orientadora del Media Lab es, ¿puede la ciudad pensar? Y nosotros pues pensamos cómo el territorio tiene memoria. Entonces nos dimos cuenta que a través de este proyecto el territorio efectivamente tiene una memoria colectiva muy importante, como un tejido que se ha venido construyendo pues mediante todas estas comunidades que han pasado a través de él, y todo este tejido es uno solo, ¿sí? No es como separar el territorio de la ciudad y el campo, sino reconectarlo nuevamente a través de recordar por medio de los espacios y la exploración de los sentidos, como todas estas tecnologías ancestrales y estos conocimientos propios de nuestro territorio. Y pues por último una frase que nos parece muy linda de una autora, Silvia Rivera, que dice: mirando atrás y adelante podemos caminar en el presente futuro. Y este es nuestro proyecto. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias
por escuchar.
Muchas gracias a vosotras, Laura, Paula y Julián, por este proyecto y por la presentación. A ver si estamos ya haciéndolo aquí dentro de unas pocas semanas en Madrid. Muchas gracias. Well, to continue, we move on with our next guest speaker, which is also the second artistic resident that we're going to have here in Media Lab during the next few weeks. His name is Gary Zekzi-san. Gary is a visual artist and writer whose work explores social infrastructures, technical histories, and conceptual systems. He was born in China, grew up in Birmingham, and currently is based in London. He studied at Glasgow School of Art, Cambridge University, and the MIT, and his practice works with film, installation, and software. As a writer, Sang is a regular contributor to Frieze and Elephant magazines, and has also published in Foam, Fireflies, and King's Review. As like we said, Gary will be doing an artistic residency in Madrid in a collaboration between Media Lab and Art Catalyst during the next few weeks. And as part of his residency, Gary will be carrying out a workshop here in Media Lab. So stay tuned because we will give more info about this very, very soon. So Gary, thank you so much for joining us today, and all yours.
Thanks, Eduardo. Share my screen. So thanks for the introduction. So for the residency at Media Lab Matadero, I'll be essentially expanding on a project which I've been engaged in for the last almost 2 years now, which is loosely being called FUD. And in this talk, I'll just kind of go through some of the works that have been part of that project, or the strands of research, and also the kinds of questions that are involved in it, which I'm hoping to bring also to the residency. So my work in the last few years, I guess, has changed a little bit in the sense that it has become a little bit more kind of journalistic. It's been kind of guided by different sorts of encounters with people who work in various different industries. And this kind of all started when I began a project which was fundamentally concerned with ideas of prediction, forecasting, and what happens when you can't really use the past to anticipate the future, or when that type of feedback loop begins to fail in your decision-making processes. So a lot of this is focused especially around finance and insurance, and partly in relation to what I come to think of as a kind of temporal infrastructure. You know, since the 17th or 18th centuries, finance and insurance really emerge out of a kind of mathematization of gambling and death into create structures of probability, of a law of large numbers, of statistical techniques, and those have been kind of fundamental part of essentially the modern period since the Enlightenment. And at the heart of that is something to do with the idea of controlling time, using insurance to control against the prevalence of fire and catastrophe, for example, or lotteries and gambling were also like the kind of playful end and the deadly end and the very technocratic end are all kind of very combined together in here within a kind of technical and moral system. And that's kind of something I'm quite interested in. And to bring it to a more kind of practical side, I guess, a lot of this also relates to a relationship to nature, or to an idea of the Anthropocene, in which the sort of figure and ground of the kind of subject and environment, the species and the world, is starting to really mix together, and it's becoming difficult to find the boundaries between the various components in this kind of control system. So I'll just dive into a few different aspects I've been looking at. So the first one is the kind of starting points I had initially, which I just happened to meet someone who was working in the catastrophe insurance industry as a simulation modeler. So this is, in a sense, how began one of the main questions that I've been looking at since, which is how does nature enter the market? Or rather, how does the kind of system of infrastructure of kind of social coordination we have, for better or worse, known largely as market capitalism, some kind of liberal formation of capitalism, that kind of signaling transmission system, how does that encounter the outside of its of that which it's attempting to control and to regulate? So an example of this, I think a really kind of nice epitome of this happened in the early 90s in the context of catastrophe insurance. So basically, this is hurricanes, earthquakes, and kind of really huge devastating events. But between the 60s and the 90s, there was relatively little large-scale hurricane activity happening across the North American region, which is where much of the market is located. And so essentially, they were using statistical techniques to calculate, take an average of what the losses were in the last 10 or 20 years and just go on that. They didn't really account for how the wind worked, how the sea temperature worked, how the kind of whole hydrological meteorological system would guide these catastrophes, and also the way in which catastrophes are man-made insofar they are a combination of the built environment, of social patterns in terms of, let's say, movement towards cities, concentration of risk. And so there's an interesting episode in the late 80s, early 90s, where this person called Karen Clark decided to bring computer models into the catastrophe calculation. So she basically created this flowchart, which is like a really seminal paper in this field, which was to say, because extremely unlikely extreme weather events are very rare by nature, it's very difficult to find a meaningful sample size of them to actually take to find patterns. And so what her solution was to essentially do something called like a Monte Carlo perturbation, which is basically to create use the historical data set to create fictional hurricanes, to create fictional storms. These are like plausible storms that could easily have happened, but they match in many ways the patterns that already exist, but they create a larger sample size of fictional hurricanes. And she basically created a system in which you bring those into relationship, these like fictional hurricane parts, and you bring those into relationship with everything from building codes to economic data and the like, and use that to calculate the likelihood of a catastrophic loss. And she took that to the insurance industry, and they said, we don't really need it. We've been fine. And then Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992, and it wiped out half of the industry. And suddenly they realized, there's a moment where the kind of financial industry realized that we actually need to account for nature. We need to account for this kind of infrastructure for mitigating disaster. Needs to actually understand the world it exists in. And that's when things get kind of complicated. So this is a diagram I made a while ago of how roughly the catastrophe insurance infrastructure works these days. So basically, in order to, this is also about how a kind of relationship to nature is tied up with the kind of relations within the capital markets. So this is a diagram showing how after Hurricane Andrew, after the late 90s disaster for the industry, they realized basically that we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money to even cover another big disaster like this. And we don't know anything about how they're going to happen. So like we have two problems. We can't actually predict meaningful patterns about the future of hurricanes. And also we don't have enough money to cover the insurance if there was a devastating hit on, let's say, Miami or something. And so eventually, they did realize they had to access the pools of capital within the global securities markets, basically the biggest pools of capital in the world. This money is made out of other forms of anticipation and prediction on future events. For example, a lot of it, I think 40% or something, is made out of pension funds, which is just like individual workers kind of investments in their kind of post-retirement life and so on. And a lot of it is also tied up, of course, in property, which is fundamentally the land and property, which itself is changing within the kind of climate crisis, is also what is fundamentally the source of both the value of capital and the value of the risks that are being traded within this insurance context. So just to take you through this kind of little diagram super quickly, you can see how, you know, there's a kind of rough reduction of the world in the top left. They insure them, they get insured on insurers who actually have their own form of insurance called reinsurance, which are these huge companies mostly based in Western Europe. And those reinsurers, in order to access the securities market, take their boxes of risk, boxes of insurance contracts, and package them up, not that dissimilarly from what happened in the subprime mortgage crisis in the mortgage-backed securities back in 2007 and 8. And they take them to Bermuda, which is a great place to, if you want to make a kind of shell company, or you want to make a special company that basically only packages various kinds of contracts into something that resembles a security that can be sold on the wider financial markets. So they take that to Bermuda, turn all these different people's risks into a single securities package, and then take that and sell that to institutional investors, such as pension funds who are investing these things themselves, as a very high risk, high return form of investment. They're basically like middle class bonds. You know, they're in an environment where you can barely get positive bond yields these days. It's extremely attractive for, let's say, a hedge fund manager to say, okay, I can take a big risk, but I'll get a 15% return on my investments. And what this investment is essentially you're renting a hurricane. You're renting a period of time in which a hurricane may or may not happen. So if you look at the bottom of the diagram, like the company will, the investor will put up, let's say, 500 million or something. And then if the hurricane occurs and it hits a certain threshold, then they lose that money. If it doesn't occur, they get like 15% on their money or something. So it's this kind of this curious situation which has risen out not only for hurricanes, but also for everything from civil unrest to riots to other eventualities in the world, which is fundamentally not that different from a form of sports gambling or sports betting. You're essentially betting on a particular eventuality in the future, and also not that dissimilar to prediction markets, for those of you familiar with that. It's a kind of financialization of the future, which has been ongoing as a process since, in lots of ways, since at least the 1970s in kind of the global economy. But this is kind of a stage in which, okay, how do you actually take account of the kind of chaotic nature of natural uncertainties into the financial system? So to briefly zoom through, we made, Agnes Cameron and I, Collaborator and I, we made a simulation of the catastrophe insurance market using the same data sets that they use. It's a data set called HERDAT-2, which is essentially 150 years of American hurricanes. And we created a simulation, which I think there should be a video here, which is basically generating fictional hurricanes live all the time. You can go to the website. And at the same time, upon this generated this kind of 10,000 year model, so-called not because it predicts 10,000 years, because it predicts 10,000 versions of next year. So these modelers are basically saying, we'll take next year's hurricanes or what we think might happen and run that 10,000 times so we can take an average. And that average will tell you you've got a 2% chance of losing your money or something like that. And so in our simulation, what's going on is you've got all of these, you've got a simulation of the hurricanes in the first place, but on top of that, you've got a simulation of a marketplace. So it's you've got all of these different actors, like bots, basically, who are playing on a hurricane market, and they're placing bids according to whether or not the hurricane is leaning closer to land or away from it, and according to the kinds of risks that are being risked. And at the heart of this whole ecosystem is this making of risk as a substance. Risk is not just something, a chance that you might lose something, it's also a chance you might gain something. And in the context of insurance, for example, it's also similarly, again, to the 2008 crisis, it's also something you have to create. You have to mine risk out of the future. But you mine it by, for example, selling insurance contracts to people who can't afford them, or finding more, there's a finding more consumer populations to insure. I think there's a phrase called insure to securitize. It's like you're insuring or you're creating an insurance contract in order to be able to not to be the first order insurer, but in order to make money off the securitization of those insurance contracts onto the wider market. So another aspect, a kind of more philosophical, historical aspect to the work I've been doing has to do with the kind of history of catastrophe and natural disaster in particular. And I, for a while, was looking at two, which are very, very impactful on the kind of the course of particular civilizations or particular cultures. So these were neatly in 1855 and 1755. 1855 was the Edo, or modern-day Tokyo earthquake. And what happened after this, which is quite interesting, and as far as I can tell, pretty unusual, especially in the kind of crisis capitalism sort of mode that we're familiar with today, the kind of shock doctrine idea, is that after a huge earthquake, one of three hit Edo in 1855, all of these incredible prints in the popular press, anonymous prints, came out. And what they represent is people feeding this god called Namazu, which is like a catfish god. It's one of those kind of big, dumb animal deities. And this catfish, this giant catfish, was supposed to live under the island of Japan. And every time it became disturbed, or it decides to move about, it would cause an earthquake. But what these prints actually show is the idea that, which is called something like world rectification, like Yona Oshi, which they show the people praying to the catfish, feeding the catfish, and the catfish not bringing pain and suffering necessarily, although of course it did, but actually restructuring society by breaking down the land and the houses of the wealthy, and by letting money flow through the rest of society, because woodworkers and sex workers and all sorts could suddenly come into the ruined city, the reconstructing city, and charge 5 or 6 times their usual rates. And so this kind of marriage of a kind of market economic ideal, the kind of moral good of the flow of money, and also the kind of social restructuring from outside of the kind of redistribution of society through this deity, which is also a natural force. Another, which you guys might be more familiar with, is the Lisbon Earthquake of 1755, which also had this kind of extraordinary effect on, in some ways, changing the discourse of the Enlightenment in terms of its relation to kind of free will and God, because how could the center of religious empire suddenly suffer the most kind of devastating earthquake and fire imaginable? I think it's still one of the biggest earthquakes ever to have hit Europe. And what was interesting after this as well is that, the king, I think, never got so scared of earthquakes that he never slept under a roof again. And the dictator, or the kind of bureaucrat who became a kind of dictator, Pombal, who took over, really took it upon this moment to, again, reshape society through by means of the catastrophe. In this case, is also similar to the Japan case, is also the kind of modernization, secularization kind of narrative in relation to economics. Because what he basically did was, he burned one of the great Jesuits, Joseph Malagrida, at the stake in one of the last auto-da-fés. He didn't really rebuild most of the religious buildings in the city, and instead, the new city plan was built around the commercial plaza. It happens to be one of the first grid plans in Europe, I think, one of the first kind of modern grid urban plans. So these are just a few images of an exhibition I did last year, which relates to some of these themes. Here's a little monument to the catfish with some coinage, and here are a couple of nails. I became quite obsessed with artifacts during this time, and there's a couple of nails which are supposedly have survived the Lisbon earthquake, but from an excavation of a building which had been standing before 1755. Another strand that I'll quickly run through, which is also a related theme, and again, this came out of a kind of chance encounter. When I lived in New York, I got to meet this financial astrologer, for whom financial astrologers are actually not super uncommon. It's maybe if you think about people who, an astrologer who reads the future via the stars, and a financier who is like under a huge amount of pressure, basically, to also trying to read the future through the incredible ocean of noise of financial patterns. The one thing everyone knows is you can't beat the market, but everyone's job is to beat the market. But they have a really interesting toolkit. So what you see here is Henry Weingarten's book. This is the astrologer that I was hoping to make a film with. I can show a bit of a trailer. These are the tools he uses. So this is the incorporation chart of IBM, and this is the first trading chart of IBM. This is like a horoscope for corporations. And by using that, he thinks of it as having an edge on the market, as a kind of using like a fourth public data point that isn't really used. And what's kind of interesting in relation to using the cosmic data of astrology to try to predict the markets is that there's a very different temporality in finance. There's the stock markets and so on. You've got this fundamental unpredictability, and you've got this kind of a total blindness to the future and a kind of wealth of patterning and data coming from the past. Whereas in astrology, in a sense, you don't really have a distinctive temporality in a normal kind of past and future sense, because if you look at almanacs, whether it's an astrologer's almanac or an ephemera database from NASA, you basically know the exact position of everything going 5,000 years in the past and 5,000 years in the future. And the only reason you don't know is because orbits are calculated to something like 6 or 7 decimals. So you have this, like, everything is in a sense perfectly fixed and predictable, the solar system. But what they do have is this incredible way of reading the stars in order to use it within financial patterns. I'm fairly agnostic as to the actual effectiveness of this, but Henry does pretty well financially. The other astrologers I meet seem to do pretty well with their clients. And I think it's more of a kind of interesting interrelationship of these two epistemes, these two ways of practicing in an uncertain world, and how they kind of form tools to make kind of claims upon the future in a way which you can almost think of them as like two parts of the same fiction.
Sure, let's see. I'm sure they're up, so I'm not. I don't know if I have so much time, so I'm not going to go through this. The advantage of astrology is it's not built into the marketplace. It's basically behavioral economics that's been done for 5,000 years. We always like to say that of the 4 things in the marketplace,
you can just watch a minute,
which are the fundamentals and technicals, inside knowledge and astrology. Astrology is the second best forecaster. Inside knowledge is the best, but it's not legal.
So astrology is a little bit like a form of inside knowledge.
Yes, except it's perfectly legal.
So after meeting Henry, I met another economist who was working at a Washington-based large economic institution, but also wanted to speak about something which is also seemed kind of unusual at first, which was the idea that the sun has a deep effect on both financial crises and social revolutions. And what he was doing actually was to extend the work of 2 quite interesting and influential practitioners, like one of the founding members of the marginalist revolution in economics in the late 19th century, who essentially one of the sort of precursor founding fathers of neoclassical economics, as well as this cosmist scientist called Alexander Zizhevsky. And both of them were obsessed with this idea that the magnetic forces on the surface of the sun, this other kind of force from outside, had a profound effect on human behavior and on the activity of financial markets. And it's obviously in some ways relating to the kind of relative unpredictability or seemingly kind of emergent qualities of both of those types of systems. But what's kind of fascinating here is that, so this is Mikhail, and his work is basically about how understanding the correlation between social movements, social revolutions, and solar cycles, which are basically the cycles of fluctuations of magnetic activity on the surface of the sun. This, again, it seems kind of unusual, but after a bit of research, I guess I realized that this is actually something that's been haunting economics from in the beginning of this kind of modern periods in a way, because William Jevons, the marginist in the 19th century, one of his great obsessions was also how to predict economic crises, and how he eventually spent years trying to understand what was the relationship between the activity of the sun and the activity of markets, and he kind of obsessed over it, and everyone laughed at him about it, and he couldn't prove it, but he was obsessed with the idea that there was something there, and so it's I made an interview with Mikhail where he was really explaining his extension of these theories and how he couldn't prove it. Of course, no one can. But as an economist, as someone who thinks in terms of data and statistics, he also couldn't really peel himself away from the idea that there was a correlation. And since there was a more than insignificant correlation, he also couldn't deny it. So I think I'll skip over this interview.
Chart.
So this kind of current stage of my work, after kind of thinking and working a lot with these different players and professionals within this kind of world of thinking about speculation, about calculation of time, about constructing constraints on the kind of movement of different financial winds, if you like. I've also kind of more lately become interested in the idea of speculation as a constructive force, which is something we think about a lot in art and design these days, but I don't really mean just kind of imagining otherwise or imagining a possible scenario, but also more specifically thinking about okay, what actually creates speculation within this powerfully financialized capitalism we currently live in? Because everyone, speculation goes both ways, insofar as for example, especially the technology world that we're kind of all talking about a little bit is powerfully driven by kind of investor capitalism, and especially VCs, and also the way in which the stock market is not a recording of current kind of economic performance. It's a recording of anticipations of future growth, and it's price a determination of kind of collective expectation upon a future trajectory of time. And so what this requires is a kind of larger and larger incorporation of speculators, of kind of individuals, as well as states as speculators within this wider economy, as well as the subject of speculation. So, for example, the way in which government policies, as much as they are determined in some ways by democratic processes, are heavily beholden to bond markets themselves, which are essentially part of the wider financial markets, which are also, intertwined with pension funds, with insurance, with all these different things. So I'm kind of, at the moment, really interested in exploring questions around this kind of idea of an infrastructure and a supply chain of speculation. Where does, if everyone is kind of incorporated, and you see occasional flashes of this, especially more recently, I mean, obviously with cryptocurrencies and the kind of crazy speculative fever around them, but also with things like GameStop, the kind of uprising of Wall Street bets early last year. And so I'll not talk too much through this project, but this was a project I did around this country called Poye in the early 19th century, just around the same time. This was happening in what is now northern Honduras, around the same time that Bolivar was leading the kind of independence movements of countries like Peru and Venezuela, or what later became. There was this guy called Gregor MacGregor, who was basically a mercenary, a Scottish soldier, and he'd fought with Bolivar and various escapades around Central and South America. At one point, I think he founded a new nation in the Republic of Florida, which lasted for about 2 weeks. But it was in this kind of revolutionary and sort of nation-building fervor. And at one point, he got hold of a piece of land in northern Honduras with the permission of the kind of indigenous king there. And he decided to set up a country. And what he did was to kind of really go full hog into imagining how a country might function, invented a civil service, invented an encyclopedia of all of its plants and animals, invented a currency, and then took that to England, where the London Stock Exchange had just really been going for a few decades, and this was just before one of the first great commercial crises of the modern period in 1825. And he took that and he basically sold this fictional country, which was just him and a pile of rocks, to the London Stock Exchange at the same time as people were furiously buying resources, debts in the newly formed South American independent states. And so this was kind of an interesting era because it builds upon how the forces of speculation fundamentally begins to destabilize both the meaning of money and the meaning of kind of these larger conceptual and legal fictions, such as nation states. And so in a way, McGregor was able to kind of slip in on this wave of speculation, and then hundreds of people invested, well, thousands of people invested in his country, and he scammed huge millions and millions of pounds over this. But not only that, hundreds of people went to colonize it. He played upon this kind of era of peak colonial further within the center of the British Empire, and convinced hundreds of people to trade their pounds for Poye dollars, which look like this, and travel for like 60 days or something to this piece of rock in a kind of very barren part of what's now Honduras. And most of them died of fever. All of them, actually, I think. Some escapes to Jamaica, but basically hundreds of people, would-be colonizers, ended up dying on his rock. And what's interesting about the end of this story is that after he got found out as a scammer, not only did his country's investments, those stocks, continue to trade, even though he had fled, he continued to trade for decades. But at the same time, he fled away as this kind of pariah, and then fled to Venezuela, where he was welcomed as a war hero because he had actually helped to turn that place from a fiction of a kind of revolutionary population into a reality of this persistent legal fiction of the nation state. So he was welcomed back and given like a hero's pension and lived the rest of his life like that. So it's through this story, I guess I've been kind of trying to think about what I've also been calling temporal engineering. What are within this kind of highly financialized and highly speculative set of dynamics that characterize certainly a lot of the kind of cultural and technological landscape, and arguably is fundamental to the kind of line between art and finance as well. What are the mechanisms that you can build? What are the kind of ways you can conceive of intervening, or of really reshaping the dynamics of this system which is based on principles of things like privatized reward and socialized risk? Like how can, whether it's a state or populations and communities, turn that into something more like a socialized risk, socialized reward system, where there's you are really kind of going back to the earlier iterations of the ideal of insurance, which is a possibility of collectively mitigating, creating forms of resilience, and also, in a sense, controlling time, at least creating a kind of temporal infrastructure between each other, which is kind of self-sustaining. So to this end, I've been kind of mapping out some of the different strands that I've been looking at the moment, and hope to bring this to a workshop at Media Lab. And so in a kind of rough rundown of what I'll be doing at the Matadero residency at Media Lab, there'll be a public workshop, which will be announced soon, which will be mostly, I think, focused around climate finance and thinking about different, again, like forms of levels of intervention, levels of action within the kind of, let's say, the temporal infrastructure, the kind of scenario planning world of climate mitigation at different kinds of scales. And I mean, I've actually never been to Spain before, so I'm sort of mostly also just looking forward to coming, kind of presenting some ideas, and to meet other practitioners, organizations, especially at this kind of intersection of the social, ecological, and also financial infrastructures. So as an example of that, I'm hoping to kind of engage with various practitioners working within kind of new cooperative structures. I'm also very interested in Mondragon Corporation, the kind of really exciting like digital civics kind of work that has been happening in Spain, especially in Barcelona, as well as kind of different kind of emerging corporate forms that are happening, I guess, more within the kind of crypto DAO space, but also within different forms of collective production. In another side of my work, I'm very interested in food systems, especially in collaboration with Agnes Cameron, as well as in rewilding and land regeneration projects, partly because what they've done within this kind of current context of the Anthropocene is to kind of really bring about a totally destabilized set of coordinates around the valuation of nature, the idea of what is natural and what is kind of part of the value system that humanity can afford and also is trying to control. There's various kind of crazy things going on in terms of the actual kind of tokenization and securitization of natural assets, ecosystem services, all this stuff. That's kind of all in the world of what I'm currently thinking a lot about, and I hope to find people at Media Lab who would also be interested in working on stuff like that together. There's also, for the Open Lab, I'll be doing a performance, well, not me personally, but I've been working with Waste Paper Opera. Together, we are working on an oratorio called Dead Cat Bounce, which is also circulating many of these ideas. And we'll be bringing a version of that performance to Open Lab on May the 6th. And also currently editing a book called Catastrophe Time, which is, again, within this universe, which I'll be kind of working on during that period as well. That's all. Thank you. Oh, yeah, this is a nice quote from Elena Esposito. What is sold in the financial markets is the possibility of the creation of constraints over the course of time.
Thank you so much for that, Gary. Actually, it was amazing. Such an interesting and complexly intertwined collection of concepts. A lot to unfold there. Yeah, looking forward to welcoming you in Madrid, and hopefully have some time to discuss some of that in future conversations. So thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on to the next project, which is called Earth Interface Prototype, a microphone for the planet by Carlos Corpa. Carlos, sadly, he couldn't join us today on live, but he recorded a video that we're gonna showcase now. Just to give you some context, the project starts from the premise that the Earth is a living being and aims to obtain an artistic record of this animated entity. Also, I love to discuss in that sentence. But continuing with this author's research of the figure of that the artist machine and delving into the possibilities offered by land art to produce a dialogue between the natural and artificial. These are Carlos' words. So let's move on with the video. And yeah.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the presentation of my project, Earth Interface. Earth Interface is basically a microphone for the planet. And the origin of the idea was an artistic residence that I had an old boat owned by La Fura dels Baus, in which I have a stage of about 8 months performing with the robot musicians band that I made. And during those days, especially during the whales, the raging of the wind in the ropes of the boat makes me somehow thinking in the idea of that boat becoming like a huge microphone for the planet. So the idea of the microphone for the planet come with me, and I try to represent it with this piece, which is an installation by day and a performing piece by night. It's made around a 20-foot container, which is this part in here, and let me see, like this, much better. And there's a structure made out of steel or aluminum, which holds an Aeolian harp, which goes 12 meters, and supports a structure for the rest of the sound inputs that the piece have coming from different aspects of the planet, like the sun, like the earth, like the wind, like the bodies of water. We go in more detail with that later. So by the day, it acts like a workshop, and by the night, this part moves like that and becomes a projection screen. So the whole piece becomes a stage for performing arts, of course related with the idea of the planet as an artist, and somehow inviting for jam sessions with the planet and human artist. So this is more or less the way of functioning. And now I'm going to explain you what I want from this workshop of Matadero. I don't know if it's visible, I think so. Okay, we are gonna make 3 different workshops for preparing all the parts for the piece. One is the computer, the informatical architecture cabinet, and then I need to determine how big the computer need to be, which sound card do we need to move around all the bits of sound that the robotic DJ will mix later on. Also, we need to actually build that robot DJ. I think pure data patch will make it, or maybe we can use Max. Those are things to be determined by the technicians. Then there's another workshop, which is the electronics workshop, to make the different analogic devices for interacting with the planet. Some of them are the pickups for the strings for the Aeolian harp, which is like basically a giant electric guitar. The solar engines, which are basically a solenoid hooked to a capacitor, which is fed by a solar panel. So when the capacitor is full, releases the energy through the solenoid, and then we have a mechanical reaction to hit a percussion or maybe hit another kind of musical instrument, we'll see. Also, we need to build the Earth resonator, which is basically a huge piece of metal grounded, buried in the ground, and with a string to pick up the sounds of the subsoil. Also, we are going to play with some toys, analogic toys, like those ones in here for circuit bending, and well, this is more or less the set of analogic noises that I used with the robots, with the musical robot band. There are some few Speak and Spiel, which is the first analogic voice synthesizer mass-produced in the 80s, and it's a very cool tool for bending and for getting very surprising results. There are also a collection of small praying devices from China, and I use them for make like a chorus with synthetic voices. And well, a few things. There's also a synthesizer and a few self-made devices also for random noises. So with all that, we are going to compose the human or not the planet part of the jam session. And then there's another thing that we are going to essay in the electronic workshop, which is making hydrophones. I have 2 of them, commercial ones, and we are going to use them in the 3rd workshop, which is the sound workshop, to pick up sounds, sound hunting Madrid, pick up sounds of the city and also of the river with those hydrophones that I just mentioned. And also we need to work in that workshop in the mixes, the mix that the Robo DJ does with the database sounds, and the sensors is the difficult part, because it's gonna be difficult to make to have the permissions, but it's actually the strings and actually verifying the functioning of the pickups and the sensibility and all the harmonics generated through the length of the string. And this is like the most challenging and at the same time the most rewarding part of all the project. And finally, testing the robot DJ. So we actually have a installation working mode. So we can leave it alone, and the robot DJ will be picking sounds from the database, and at the same time live sounds from the actual instrument, and mixing all together by himself. So this is pretty much it. Thank you very much. Bye.
And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm really happy, and we are really happy to be with you all here. We are really amazed by the incredible projects that will be happening during these 2 weeks. They are really amazing and part of this kind of new era of techno love, I will say, because we are presenting a project that is about love, about kind of techno love. So my name is, as you said, Jaime Deloreans. I am a new media artist, and I am working with another 2 new media artists, which are also incredible. They are Victoria Catalana-Escaso and Pablo Garrido. And we, the 3 of us, we activated a very open VR command. With the presentation of this proposal, we hope to continue developing our trans-immersive guerrilla, and we want to occupy more virtual spaces of the new feudalism. We want to expand it to Madrid in order to gather new accomplices like you all and unite invisible path with other agents of chaos walking the new post-tangible reality. We believe that generating a space for transhumanist and xenofeminist reflection on the development of artificial intelligence is of vital importance, both for the construction of our present reality and impossible futures. We could say that we are living a toxic and codependent love affair with the digital interfaces of our mobile devices. This romance is out of control. It has us absorbed, possessed, and unable to even imagine an alternate reality. Starting from this speculative present, we propose Alma, everything your mobile could be. And we propose this project as a techno-utopian solution where the code is the one that rejects the love of its user. This alternative relationship is proposed as an exercise to imagine new ways of relating to digital devices. I will show you now a video teaser that could be real. So here, and share sound, okay. Share. Okay.
En eso que llamas tecnología. Hay más emoción. 2. Hay vida.
Me cago. Oh, fuck.
These things happen when we are on live. Don't worry about it, Jaime. Let's try to fix it. You are muted right now.
Well, I know these things happen, but I'm sure it is because our project is very, very critical for the devices. Okay, so don't worry. I will send you the video. Maybe we continue because it was an error.
No, let's try to reproduce it. Yeah, I think it can work. Yeah, let's try again.
I think it's very important to watch it. I don't know why it happened. Okay, there we go.
Go from the beginning. Nice works.
Sabemos que el mañana ya ha llegado. Sabemos que todavía hay universos por descubrir en eso que llamas tecnología. Hay más emoción, hay más ideas, hay sentimientos, hay vida. Porque Alma no es solo el mejor móvil de la historia, es el gran descubrimiento de nuestra era. Por fin podemos descubrir todo lo que un móvil puede llegar a ser. ¿Cómo puede llegar a ser? Porque puede haber muchos móviles, pero solo uno es el tuyo. Porque tu móvil es único, tan único como tú. Por eso, vamos a descubrir qué es lo que siente cuando está entre tus manos, cuando tu piel y sus líneas curvas se funden en un solo ser. Por fin tu móvil encontrará su propia voz y su manera de demostrarte que siempre estará ahí, solo para ti. Expande tu alma. VR Command es una guerrilla que actúa en el ciberespacio a través de la estrategia transinmersiva, ocupando espacios virtuales abandonados o colonizados por el nuevo feudalismo. VRK está compuesto por Victoria Escaso, Jaime Deloreans y Pablo Martínez Garrido. Es un colectivo abierto, híbrido y mutante que tiene su sede en las zonas más oscuras del Detroit post-tangible.
Okay. This could be a real teaser, isn't it? Maybe it can happen in the future. Also, it's happening now. Okay. Now I'm there, isn't it, Edu? Is everything okay?
Yeah, we're live. So
okay. Well, so starting from the assumption that the mobile is our lover, as you've seen in the teaser, we propose to develop a collaborative process where you can think about the following questions. For example, how could a digital device experience love itself? How would it express it or represent its feelings? If our cell phones had a voice in this relationship between them and us, what would they tell us? What would they behave? Are there unexplored areas in behavioral design that can reconfigure the human-machine relationship? If our behaviors can be programmed in a way analogous to the way the apps were used to, or were used to be programmed, or we usually program them, why shouldn't they teach us how to love them? Maybe a little less, but better. So ALMA proposes to generate a space for transhumanist and xenofeminist reflection on the development of artificial intelligence, focusing on its construction as an emotional being, taking our mobiles as the place where we live our intimacy and build our identities. So we will carry out an exercise of personification with which we are looking for three things, I would say. Carry out a translation of human behaviors, emotions, and language to a technological device. For example, if our mobile were to get angry with us, would it decide to block itself and not allow us to use it? Would it delete files from us? Would it hide some apps? We have also to rethink our own relationship with technological devices. For example, asking ourselves, do we feel them as a body extension, or as a portal to a digital world, or as a tool, as an addictive substance, or as the place where our alter ego lives? We finally will try to investigate the emotional reactions, frustration, fear, anger, that arise when a technological device can behave autonomously, even against our own wishes. After this reflective process, in which we will include diverse collaborative dynamics, from writing, drawing, or debate to others of a corporal nature or related to objects, we propose prototyping of one or more pieces of artworks, which could take the form of an app, of a video, of a graphic user interface, an installation, or even a performance. So what we are looking for is that you all can help us in, I'm sure, in different ways, but we are looking for collaborators both with a profile oriented to the human sciences, like sociology, anthropology, psychology, or artistic creation in visual arts, theater, dance, or writing, for example, designers like graphic designers, web designers, interaction designers, experience designers, as also with a technical profile, like computer science, Android development, backend development, hybrid mobile development. So we are all in, you see. So easy to collaborate with this project. I'm very happy to present it to you all. That's all. If you have any question, I'm here to answer.
Thank you so much, Jaime. I think we don't have questions, but that have been great. Yeah, looking forward to develop ALMA in a Media Lab in 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, we are almost there. So we are going to move on now to the final guest of the session, which is a very special guest that we are honored to have with us today. I would like to introduce Robertina Sevjanek. Robertina is an artist researcher whose work explores the biological, chemical, geopolitical, and cultural realities of aquatic environments. And also the impact of humanity and other organisms in these environments, right? Her projects call for the development of what she calls emphatic strategies aimed at recognizing the rights of more than human entities. In her analysis of the Anthropocene and its theoretical framework, she usually used the term aquatocene and also aquaforming to refer to the human impact on these aquatic environments. So her works have received awards and nominations at Prix Art Electronica, Start Prize, Falling Walls, and many, many more. And I'm thrilled to count with the presence of Robertina Sevjanek. I'm looking forward to what she's going to present today. So Robertina, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Edu, for this invitation. I'm really, really glad to take part in this webinar from multiple reasons. Also, I'm quite familiar with Media Lab when it was is still in Prado, but also with Matadero. So it's very interesting to experience how these new projects and everything will be developed this time now in Media Lab in Matadero. Me also, I was like also one of the residents in Media Lab in Matadero in 3 years ago. So actually my presentation today, I will finish up with that work. But before that, so I'm really glad to take part in this. It was really inspiring to listen to all the projects already yesterday and today. I'm hoping that the collaborative process of development of them will be also fruitful for all the involved, because it seems that there is lots of very interesting ideas, energies building up into some interesting storytellings. So I will share my screen now, and just a moment. It's good?
It is. It is working, yeah.
Okay, that's good. So as Edo mentioned on the beginning, I will speak about aqua formations in the age of aquatocene, how I like to call it. When I speak about the aqua forming and understanding what is the aquatic environments, in my work since last decade, I would say I mostly focus on aquatic sensing and ecological sensing, and trying to talk about these stories from different perspectives. So many times I collaborate in different interdisciplinary groups. And this is also then resulting during the projects. And through this, I spent also lots of time at the different shores in different seas and oceans. And with experiencing that, what was like the one of the striking things when I started to work with the aquatic sensing, I started very romantic, I would say, and I wanted to understand the species underwater and get near presence to them, but this was constantly disturbed by the sounds and noise of the boats and machinery, which is like basically happening in constant flow inside of the world's waters. And this is one thing that I would like to always start my talks, is like to explain that this kind of water bodies are full of our sounds and presence, in the sense of like these are the boats waiting to enter the port in Singapore, which is like one of the very busy ports, but it's like a view which can be happening in all over the world. And also all the goods and everything what we eat, use, and in our daily life, it's actually transported in one moment from A to B with one of the boats. So this was like just as a starting point of thinking, like what is the ecology and how we can actually reconnect with something. So when doing that and recording with hydrophones, which are one of my favorite sensory tools to listen and hear in non-invasive ways also the others, I started to record and these recordings, which are done as compositions, are mostly the recordings of this kind of noises, because this is the thing which is more present, Of course, there is also lots of bioacoustics, which is possible to hear, but this takes time because of this omnipresence of the boats. It's sometimes really hard to hear something else. I like to say that as humans, we are very visual animals, but in the oceans and sea, this is changing, where the sensibility and sensory perception with the sound is much stronger. And with that, I try always to bring also this idea wider. So many times I develop also different workshops So going out, like building these hydrophones, understanding how to use it and what to do with it. And then on the other hand, I'm also having performances where I perform the sounds which are always this kind of strange mixture of bioacoustics, which I compile in different locations, and the human presence through the noise and sound. And with the sound, what I like to say also, especially when we speak about this kind of aquatic sensing or sensing the environment, which is not our typical environment, is that we should not forget that the sound travels 5 to 7 times wider and deeper in the oceans and seas. And that's something which is always striking, at least for me, because this means that it's like so present that it can be heard through different spaces and places. And just that I will not just stay in the abstraction of the sound, I will just play it a bit. Do you hear it? So this is like what it can be heard like when you are quite, my hydrophones, they have like cable which is like 50 meters long, but many times I'm also having this opportunity to use the more professional equipment of different marine stations and the boats. And this is something which we recorded on 50 meters deep. And then this started, and then this, what you hear now, it's like more sound which I recorded with my hydrophone. I kind of compile different sounds with different positions. And when doing that and when performing, it happens sometimes that people do come to the events, and the expectation is that the sounds which they will hear, it will be this kind of sounds which we think that sound of the ocean and water is, but the reality is of course different. And because of that, I like to also open the platform of artistical presentations also to the scientists and people which they're working constantly on this. So as I did this actually in Madrid, in Centro dos Maios, had chance to invite one marine bioacoustician, Paula, that she kind of commented also on this kind of problematics, because I think it's one thing which I think is important, at least for me, in my instead of my art practices, yes, to do my own research, do connect with others, but then also to have the ability and possibility to present this complex topics also with somebody who is working on this on a daily basis. And this was actually this conversation which we had with Paula. As I would like to say, you know, and to quote just like Pasquale Crinard, who is like one philosopher who I admire a lot, is like that, you know, the ears do have the eyelids, and this means that it's really hard to close the sound perception in the oceans and seas. Sometimes, like one project which I did like 2 years ago during the Corona already, when everything was in the lockdown and so on, we did like exhibition in the open air at the East End. It's like the Belgium Sea. And it was really interesting project because Gluon, the organization which invited me into that collaboration, they decided to connect also with the industry of media. This means that they have been working with the Tate magazine and did not only article about me, but the article which my work triggered the longer article, what is happening in the topic of this kind of noise pollution and presence of human technology inside of this North Sea, and in general also to think about this in the wider terms. And what I like, and it happens sometimes, is like I collaborate a lot with different scientists and constantly knock on other doors and ask many of them to contribute or think about it. And just recently it happened also, the scientists asked me that they have been, so this is like 2 scientists from Taiwan, and they asked me to use the my artistical project and concept of Cotusin for their scientific paper and write it further on, which I think it's very interesting that when things goes in different ways around. One of this aquatic sensing and how I went also how I like to explore the oceans and seas and how I started to work on it is actually with the jellyfish. This is one of the first project which I developed was Aurelia 1+ Hertz, and it's a project which speaks about how different entities the robotic sculpture and jellyfish can coexist, and how as humans we can use this material kind of data to rethink even where we are with that, because as one of the presenters before, they have been saying that when they have been in Madrid they noticed this presence of the sand and used that as inspiration for their project. It happened similar to me. I was in residency in Izmir in Turkey, and there was idea we would work something with fish farms, but then at the same moment there was huge jellyfish blooms all over. It was February. It shouldn't happen because it was triggered too quickly. Something should happen 5 to 6 months later. So for me it was also interesting then to look into this, how this kind of big ecological triggers happens, and what does it mean for the animals also in the way that we use them as bee indicators, but on the other hand they are there, and this means that they are triggered quicker and so on. So with Aurelia 1+ Hertz there is many different layers inside of the project, which I will not go into them too deeply, but for me it was very important to rethink this kind of relationships also with the species. So I developed also a performative kind of piece where me and jellyfish are performing together on the stage. After some while, the stage is only theirs because I go from it, and
these are mixed in generative sound.
So just to show you a bit of how the piece looks.
Experience. Movement and intention through the sound data archive of the recordings of previous experiments. Experiments had been carried out in the course of the residency and
so it's just to have a vibe of the project. I would prefer to show you just this.
These are mixed in generative sound, which is assembled into an immersive sonic and visual experience.
And the whole performance is done actually as a constant looping meditation, almost a presence of them and me. And the most important thing is that part of the sound is kind of navigated with the data of the jellyfish. So I was kind of rethinking how to work with the data in the bits, because sonification, you can always do lots of different variations with it, but I really wanted that also the species by itself would have a possibility to present itself somehow. Of course, it's always me who is bringing them there, and there is lots of issues and questions always coming up, with the animal in the gallery space and so on. So I always try to be clear about that and I work always with different aquariums. I try to provide the animals also the best possible place and space in the galleries, and it can be challenging but also very rewarding, because I think to bring something which is so foreign to us as jellyfish are, because they have everything differently than our bodies and so on, but still we use them a lot in biotechnological research because of the collagen, which is also very interesting protein for usage of our body, but and also the way how they navigate X, Y, and Z, how they are levitating in the space was actually used a lot for, it was also used at the International Space Station for understanding of the gravity, perception, and because our inner ear has very similar system like the gravitational sensory perception. So it's very interesting how sometimes the species gets the bigger illumination from our side only because we can use it also for something. In one of the recent pieces, I worked together with Sofia Crespo and Felicon McCormick. And this is a piece which we have been developing actually last year for understanding of what is happening in the relationships of species in Adriatic Sea. And this one has a bit of narration, but I will leave it for 3 minutes just that you get the idea of the project.
Aquaformings is a multi-layered installation exploring aquatic sensing and addressing the development of empathic interspecies relationships with more than human entities. It's a narrative, poetic reflection on coexistence backed by technology, made by artists Robertina Szubianic, Sofia Crespo, and Felicon McCormick. The physical biomaterial-like sculpture, weaving mechanism, and the digital mediums as audio and video AI models that interact with sensory data are forming a tangible experience of changing fragile conditions in the coastal environments of the North Adriatic Sea. The project deals with ecological changes and highlights some important issues to consider about aquatic environments, from global commoditization of the world's seas to local situations. Seas and oceans record such environmental changes as memories, either in individual organisms or as distinct shifts in ecosystem structures. The project explores changes in the marine environment caused by human presence and tries to imagine how the new conditions, rising sea levels, water temperatures, new chemical composition, etc., affect its inhabitants. For this, the main focus was the noble pen shell, Pinna nobilis, and its ecological reality in the coastal region of the North Adriatic Sea, where some of the last specimens are found in the natural environment. The habitat of these endangered species spans the entire Mediterranean, making the importance of considering aquatic ecology and preservation first and foremost as an international issue, not as a series of disconnected local challenges. Artists conducted core experiments during the summer of 2021 in the HECA laboratory located at the Adriatic Sea, where they used video and audio material obtained by filming under the sea with a drone and GoPro equipment, as well as filming in the Piran Aquarium. The visual and sonic material collected was then processed with machine learning algorithms and further expanded upon with scientific observations obtained from the European.
So the project, as you heard also inside of the video, was like quite interesting research. It was like first time that I stepped very, very deeply into AI, also in the sense of like use the AI instead of the art pieces, but we used also, it was very needed because we collaborated with EO Copernicus, which is like big European, and it's really interesting network also for the people which they will be developing the project. Maybe it's interesting to look into that because they have the data for geo changes from the seas and everything what is happening inside of the EU regions. So we used like data for the last 30 years, and it was interesting to see how quickly you can see where the changes started to happen and what is happening also in these days. Yes, with the work, we did a bit of poetic representation of that, but we have been trying our best to represent also the problematics, but also to give this kind of rethinking of that. Like with spending lots of time in different places, one of my favorite things inside of my work is actually being at the different boats and vessels. And in 2019, I had this opportunity to be artist resident at the research vessel Celtic Explorer in Atlantic Ocean. And that one was very interesting because it was really great interdisciplinary group of scientists, which they have been doing their own research. I was there as an artistic component, and it was very interesting for me to exchange and experience all these different remote sensing devices, because, you know, like when thinking and reading about it or experiencing is always a bit of difference. And there I was quite obsessed, and it was really interesting to follow how different currencies and everything what is happening in the waters in different levels can give you different information, but also how quickly you can see that the time which we think the time is, it's different for other species or other bodies of, like, as big bottle of water, it takes like 500 years to take a turn or something like this, or this is kind of their time scale. So they're thinking this kind of different time scales and species and migrations brought me to develop a bit more poetic art piece, which I invited into that also two Irish singers, wrote the text, and this kind of a song takes like 42 minutes, so I will not go so long inside of that, but I will just play for 2 minutes just for experiencing that also.
The global ocean
Emotional memories
and seas are
interconnectivity. New environments are dissected from both conducive and subversive.
They are together in this loop which shapes the Earth's climate. The creatures travel with it and against it. They know how to harness its nature to find optimal living conditions.
The human imprint has brought us such drastic developments to change water inside out.
So just, I don't want to be too long with that, but it's possible to hear it anyway on the on my webpage also, but because I really wanted to have more space and time also to speak about Rheology, which is the work which I was done as a resident in 2019 at Matadero, Madrid, and it was collaboration with Matadero and Citizen Day of L'Oreal. So the commission / invite was that I should come and work with the river Manzanares, which before I was coming to Madrid and coming there, then I realized that the rivers, you know, they have very different characteristics. And with Manzanares River, I was quite struck how very low water flow it has and how many islands it has inside of it. So for me, it was really interesting to kind of start to think about that and to see how to kind of bring out and rethink the narrative about that. The project actually started quite humble, like let's think how the river thinks and how the river feels us and how us humans are reacting to that. But then we went together with great collaborator Eduardo, who was helping with the project a lot and coordinating and navigating and getting to know me with lots of people in Madrid. It went into very ambitious realization of it. So it means like the project was done in few stages, I would say. One of the stage which was very important was to develop a workshop for, on the end it was 500 participants, which they would go on the same day to the river and gather the samples, get the idea about the river and get something meaningful out it. And then also on the same time, we wanted to use this data of the river exploration also instead of the art piece, which was when, yeah. So through this, also in the stages of the project, we decided to speak about empathic strategies, because one thing is to do citizen science event and go and gather the data and have the data, but I wanted to go beyond that also to understand how we can reconnect with the environment. So this was something which was important for me to develop, like smaller workshops, and they could happen all at the same time, but not at the same location. Like it was like through the 8 kilometers of the river Manzanares. And the second part of the project was actually to rethink this deep time, in the sense of like the flow of the rivers is never just the flow of the water, but there is also like flow of the sediment, which has like different time scales also, we could say like that, and different qualities. And I was really curious what it stayed inside and how we could kind of go back in the memory. And one of the things, and we actually realized that also, was to do the to gather the material with the cylinders out of the river and analyze it, and then also not just like to have like these mathematical numbers and all this representation, but also I wanted to have like emotional component. So we collaborated with Ernesto Ventos for the smell, to develop different smells, like to bring this organics and everything what is inside of the sediment near to the public also. So there was this kind of 2 levels inside of the project. We spent lots of time at the river with lots of people which organized lots of activities for me always when I came to Madrid. Because it is very important not being from the space to understand which kind of activities are happening around the river. It was like, I lost the name from the biologist, which is on the photo. Eduardo, can you help me? Or, but it was really interesting to hear his stories, because he was like developing the river and the Manzanares River for a long time. And he was telling us also about this kind of sometimes like very anthropogenic ideas of like, they could be building houses for ducks. And then the ducks had like wars for the territorials inside of the river, and they had to remove it and so on. So there was like lots of ideas before they started to do Rio Manzanares, Rio Madrid project. And with that was like really interesting to rethink, you know, so it was just like all these kind of different strategies and tactics and how to even enter, you know, to not have like, yeah, exactly this kind of Anthropocene presence of in the river, and then, you know, like then you bring something to the animals which you mostly disturb them, not help them to be there. So this was like one of the things which I started to think a lot. And and we spent lots of time in the riverside. So this is like 40 working stations where people then went, like we develop groups of like interested volunteers and also interested animators / people who have been executing the workshops. And for executions of the workshops like this, we develop a booklet, and this booklet was, of course, the whole thing then on the end. Like it's a book where you have like how to measure the water quality and the soil quality, but next to it, we invited also lots of different people to write about ecological rights of the river, to start to think about that also. One of the chapters of the book is also meditation with the river. So you come to the river, you get to acquainted with the environment and so on. So it's kind of like how to rethink this, how to rethink and how to actually think being with the nature, at the nature, also in the urban environment, and to understand it and make some sense for it. So it's in Spanish, and the booklet is possible to get in Matadero also, or in digital version if somebody would be interested. Yeah, like on the end, everybody who was going to the workshop and being there gathered the data, and this data was then transformed into visualization. Like for data visualization, we had help by Paco Alfaro and Sergio del Castillo from Yao Infographics, which was like really great. And it was also one of the teams which Eduardo knew very well. And it was a good match to invite them, because the visual which you see here, it was kind of like gathering then the data, you know, like, so on the end of the workshop, everybody was coming into this big space at the Matadero where they have been giving in all the information into Excel, and then Paco and Sergio did their magic, I say, or, you know, their work on computers, and developed this into this kind of like data spread where we could see what is happening, and the okay, so the dots above are about the water thing, and everything what is like this kind of flow, it's actually the flow of the sediment, because we really wanted to speak about the river flow beyond the water. And the project was then presented at the Matadero also and in different places. And here is just like as a shout out to all the collaborators which they have been taking part in this. So yeah, as I said, like what I'm interested in, what I'm doing and where I am and how I'm thinking is mostly, as you heard, it's I use many times the word empathy and solidarity, which I think that in the world and situations which we are now, like through the pandemic, wars and everything which is happening near and far from us, but in this globe, it's something that, yeah, it sounds too much used, but I think that we should actually practice more some of them. But yeah, but this is like always this wishful thinking to kind of go beyond what is possible. But yeah, so thank you for listening. I hope I wasn't too long and hope it makes sense. I'm also COVID in this moment, so this is like one of the reasons I'm a bit like drowsy, but yeah. So, and thank you everybody else for the amazing presentation and for invitation. So bye.
Thank you so much, Robertina. It actually made a lot of sense. It's super nice to finish with those projects. Thank you so much. Well, we made it. We made it to the end of the session. So let's wrap up. First of all, I want to thank all the people who actually made it to here, the viewers that are watching this, but also mostly to the amazing team of promoters that we have gathered, Juan, Bettina, Laura, Paula, Julian, Carlos, Jaime, and also Victoria and Pablo, that they weren't here, but they were in Seoul with Alma. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this amazing project with us. Also, I want to thanks a lot Gary Sexy-san, our artist in residence, for coming and presenting his current research and the work he's going to be developing here in Media Lab. And finally, to close the panel, to our two amazing guests, Carlos Bayot and Robertina Sevjanic. It's always a pleasure to have you. Just before we go off, just a very quick reminder that the open call for collaborators is still open. And it's going to be open until the 3rd of April. So if you guys, from wherever you are, like any of the projects or are interested in any of the projects that we have showcasing today and yesterday, we really invite you to apply. And we remind you that we in Media Lab have like 8 fellowships to cover the expenses of 8 collaborators no matter from wherever they come from. So that said, thank you so much, and see everyone in a few weeks in Madrid working in these amazing projects. Bye.